Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Namens with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and with me is Shoshanga Clayton. You may have had the pleasure of meeting her. She's our Office Director for the Division of Outreach and Education at FMCSA. Before I get underway, I'd like to send a shout out and thank you to Joe Capozzello and the group travel family. They have given us, again, this great opportunity to spread our message of safety with you, and also to the Mesa Planning Group for some incredibly great and fun times. I hope you've seen that we can let our hair down a little bit, as well as bring these messages to you about safety, some of which I admit are going to be a little more serious note than we've been used to over the past couple of days. I'll try and keep that as light as possible. But for obvious reasons, safety is a very important consideration of ours. In fact, we'll be covering that in a number of ways. We're going to give you the case for safety. We'll tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do, and even a bit of how we do it. Might take a little deeper dive there to help you. We'll also talk about the need of what you need to do, which is to look before you book. I'll sound like a broken record by the time you're out of here over these last days here, but I think it's a noble message and one worth remembering. And then finally, a little bit to show you how to navigate around and some of the things that'll help you to get to some of this information. First, the case for safety speaks for itself. I liked Frank Passetta's message. He was so enthusiastic the other night regarding how we would go about selling what has become so important to us with the various destinations that you plan. What I'd like to do, I don't think I could be any more enthusiastic about the safety message, but what I'd like to do is think that as a part of what you're doing in terms of selling what you have, is that you can sell the fact that you're doing a search for the carriers that you're going to use, because that's, after all, an important part of the destination as well, isn't it? The contracts and the information that John Howe went over explained to you how to get value out of some of the negotiations when you're looking at contracts and what those things ought to entail. But my question to you is, are you using those same kinds of concerns when it comes to safety? Safety takes a backseat to no one, okay? If your trip and the delegates and people that come to your event go to the greatest place for the greatest value that you could ever have possibly found, if some of the pictures that they take look like something you see on the screen, I guarantee you, folks, they're not going to be talking about what a great bridge or waterway or desert, whatever it might be. They're going to remember some very unfortunate circumstances. Not trying to scare you, but trying to put this into perspective for you, that it's so important to think about safety and safety first. Make that a part of your negotiations as well. Are you familiar with the fact that there are 10 hours maximum driving time for that driver, for example? It's not out of bounds for you to consider that in the contract and ask your carrier, what are we going to do about this? We've got a 16-hour destination, and you get 10 hours for your driver. Is there going to be an alternate shift driver? Will there be a stayover so that they can get the required 8 hours of rest beforehand? You can find things about their insurance, whether they have insurance or not. One of the things John Howe mentioned was a quote from Ronald Reagan that said, "Trust but verify." Wow, that couldn't be more true than here. We have the tools to help you do that, and we're here to help raise your awareness that what we're selling doesn't cost you anything. It's free. Safety and its safety message, the implications for how it can help you as a carrier are phenomenally helpful, and they can even help you as a selling point that you check all your carriers and you know that they have a great safety record. All right, so the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, I'm going to emphasize the word safety because that's our middle name. It is so because we use safety as part of our mission, which is to prevent crashes, injuries, fatalities with large trucks and buses. We do that through enforcement of regulatory authority that we have for interstate freight, hazmat, household goods, and our most precious cargo, human beings or passengers, okay? How do we do that? Well, we use the compliance, safety, and accountability prospect. We, first of all, require carriers who are interested in getting into the business to get a certificate of interstate operating authority from us. We issue that only if they can demonstrate that they are fit, willing, and able to abide by our safety regulations. Next, we require those carriers who are in the business to continue to be in compliance by monitoring their compliance, their safety, their adherence to the safety regulations. And we do that through information through not only our own investigations, but through our state partners who keep us informed through database uploads of violations and things that are found on the roadside as well as at the carrier facility. We'll get into that in just a moment. Finally, what do we do at the end for accountability? Well, we hold carriers' feet to the fire who are demonstrating that they're unfit, unwilling, and unable to comply with these requirements. If their rating becomes a final unsatisfactory rating, we do remove their operating authority, and they are, again, required to demonstrate to us that they'd be fit, willing, and able to comply. All right, well, how do we do this? Compliance reviews through our carrier safety rating is a very important part of what you would be considering when you go to check out these carriers you're thinking of hiring. You spend a lot of time looking at the various hotels and destinations and places that you might go and think about the contract part of it. You need to be aware of adding some of those concerns to your search when you're considering a carrier. And part of what you're going to do is you're going to look at what that carrier's safety rating is. Satisfactory, they're in compliance with the controls, the adequate safety controls are in place. We review their records, their documenting procedures, their violations, all of that stuff. We get under the vehicles and look at the vehicles. We look at their maintenance records on those vehicles. A conditional safety record means they're inadequate in terms of the safety controls, but there's no violations in place. But we work with them in the safety management cycle, hand in hand, to tell them, hey, here's the shortcomings. How are you guys going to address this? You know, how can we get you back towards safety and avoid the next one, which is an unsatisfactory rating, which, as I've mentioned, if that becomes final, they're basically out of business. They're prohibited from operating, nor would you or could you hire a carrier whose rating was unsat. Beyond that safety rating, which, by the way, is required every 3 years, we keep abreast of their behaviors on safety performance by the safety measurement system. It can mean that on roadside inspections, for example, the vehicle and or the driver might be placed out of service. Doesn't mean the whole carrier operation's out of service, but that particular vehicle that's being inspected might have enough violations on it where legally it can't be operated again safely and provide passenger transportation. Same can happen with the driver. If they're out of violation or out of regulations, they aren't tracking their hours of service, things like that. We categorize violations into the basic analysis and safety improvement categories, basics for short. And the way it would look when you pulled it up and did a search on the carrier is basically this. You can see the little picture denotes the various type of violations that are rated. This particular one in the center regarding vehicle maintenance illustrates this yellow triangle. All it's telling you is that there's a threshold limit of violations that take place, and in that particular category, it has risen to a point where there are interventions necessary by our agency to go in and say, what's the problem here? We notify the carrier, you're on our radar about this one. You'll probably find some violations in here. If they don't rise to the level of an intervention threshold, it isn't as much of a concern. But what's important here is that you'll see that these come back to you, if you were to click on any one of these, as a percentile score, 0 to 100. 100 is the worst. In other words, you're doing worse than 100% of the other carriers that have a similar number of operations or vehicle miles that are traveled. Those are the sorts of things that you'd want to become familiar with. One thing I want to point out that's very important, this does not indicate the carrier is out of service. They are legally entitled to continue operations, but it notifies the carrier and the public, because this is all public record that you and the carrier and we use to determine interventions. And it just notifies you that this has reached the intervention threshold, and there's probably a need for us to get in there and for you to maybe take a look at those basics, how they might compare to other carriers that you might be considering hiring. Okay? If you were to pull up the whole safety management system page, you'd see the basics appear down here as we showed you, but above that, you get this handy little notification of the rating of that carrier, in this case satisfactory. It was done about a month ago, really, and remember that's usually only every 3 years unless problems dictate that we go in there and do an intervention, then we'll re-rate them. That's part of the reason why you have to look up your carrier every trip, every time. The stuff can change. Insurance, do they have insurance? And if they do, what is it as of the last day? Because this is updated actually hourly. Here's a little link that'll take you right to the part of our website that shows the insurance that's required and the amount that they have on file. In this case, $5 million required. They have $9 million on file. They're covered. Their record looked pretty good back there. They had a satisfactory rating. And it gives you an idea of how to look into their information. Finally, I'm going to scan right through these because you've got information on your desk or table or chair today that tells you a little bit about our how to get at this information, the iPhone or Android app, the Safer Bus app. It would look like that. You'd punch in the DOT if you knew it, or any or all part of that carrier name, and it would bring up their information. There's the basics that we talked about before. If they're not allowed to operate like the carrier below it, then it would illustrate that. You'd go to our website. You could do the same sort of thing through our consumer part of the website. It can take you right to the look before you book. We talk a lot about that. There's a step process that goes into your analysis of that carrier. I apologize. I guess I'm out of time here. But I've got one more slide, and it's basically to say thank you. Look before you book every trip, every time. Let us help you. Come see us, even if you're not on the market list with us. We'd love to be able to tell you more about that. Thanks so much, folks.